Herself.
Okay. Yes, because I'll talk about a little bit about my background in my remarks. So I'm Kathy Kiely. I'm the Lee Hills Chair in Free Press Studies at the Missouri School of Journalism. And I want to thank the Muleskinners for letting me barge into your meeting to tell you about a reporting project that I'm piloting at the Missouri School of Journalism this year. And what I'm hoping for here is some feedback and some help in recruiting participants. I'd hoped to bring a couple of my students here today, but they're all working. They're busier than the president. Background on me. Before I moved from my current fantastic job, and it is a fantastic job, to Columbia with the district, I spent decades living in the District of Columbia. I covered the White House, I covered Congress, I covered national politics for a wide range of publications, and I was involved in the coverage of 10 presidential campaigns.
Wow.
I want to do this one different. Now, there's going to be
Sarah, Kathy got muted somehow. Can you unmute her, please?
Yeah, I just got the note that said the host asked to mute you, but I did not ask to mute you. Muted.
Oh, I'm fascinated. Yeah.
We good now?
Yeah, it's good now. Thank you.
I don't know why I popped up.
Okay. So as I said, I covered the White House, Congress, national politics, and I was involved in covering 10 presidential campaigns. This one I want to do different. We're going to have lots of opportunities for my students to do the usual campaign coverage with congressional races, the governor's race, the range of Senate state offices that are going to be up, and of course, some very interesting ballot initiatives. But what interests me most is the black hole in the midst of it all. The candidates Missourians won't get to interact with in real life are the ones who will be dominating the national news. Thanks, Electoral College. David Wasserman, one of the political handicappers at the respected Cook Political Report, told my class just yesterday that the presidential race is going to come down to just 6 states. Used to be 18, just 6. Missouri is not one of them. That's right. So as far as the people running for the White House are concerned, this really is flyover country. So I started thinking, maybe the best way to cover the 2024 presidential campaign is to cover the people the presidential candidates are ignoring. This means you, mid-Missouri. What if we started with a radical idea? The idea that the divisive topics about which our candidates and nightly talking heads bloviate so endlessly might not be what really matters to Americans. What if we chose to ignore the polarization industrial complex and ask actual voters or people who are choosing not to vote what they think about what really matters? What if we focus not on who they intend to vote for or not, the horse race question, but why? A question that often takes more than one interview to answer. What if we went back to them again and again, just like we do with the candidates and their advisors, to ask them what's on their minds today, tomorrow, the next day? What better place to do that than right here, the proverbial heartland, the middle of the middle? Now, some of these thoughts were inspired by my own experience watching the vast polarization industrial complex morph into the behemoth it is today. And I'm happy to discuss that during the Q&A. But there were 2 more recent catalysts. The first was an op-ed piece published a couple of months ago in the Los Angeles Times by Tom Rosenstiel. Now, Rosenstiel is pretty well known in the news business. He's a longtime media critic who co-authored a widely respected book called Elements of Journalism. We and a lot of other journalism schools use it in our curriculum. In his column, Tom indulged in the quadrennial media critic's ritual. telling campaign reporters what a bad job they did last time, and offering a host of helpful suggestions on how they can do a better job this time. As a one-time campaign reporter, you can imagine I might have mixed feelings about that. But as a longtime journalist, I also have a thick skin. So I read on. And I found Tom made a couple of observations and suggestions that resonated. Number one, and I quote, "The press should dramatically reduce the time it spends following candidates around and attending rallies, imagining that the way politicians run their campaigns is a proxy for how they would govern. This conventional approach inevitably leads to stories on campaign tactics and horse race coverage. Most voters don't care. The press does it because it's easy." Close quote. Agree. 1000%. Number two, and again, I quote Tom Rosenstiel, "Campaign coverage should focus more on the biggest problems facing the country, from inflation to climate change to the resilience of our democracy, and tell us what the candidates have done and can be expected to do about them." Close quote. On this one, as they like to say at the Supreme Court, I agree in part and dissent in part with my colleague. I agree we should focus on the issue, but I'm not so sure we should be the ones deciding what the biggest problems facing the country are. And this brings me to the third item in Rosenstiel's column that made me stand up and salute. Campaign coverage should focus on, of all things, the electorate, Rosenstiel proposed. The ending of his column is great, and I'm just going to read it to you. Quote, "The press is supposed to operate in the name of the people, but too often its work reduces the public to a bystander. It should be a subject. Journalists should go beyond the usual polls and Midwestern diner interviews to report more deeply and consistently on what people across the country are feeling and thinking." At bottom, Rosenstiel concludes, elections are moments of public self-reflection. They tell us how we, the people, feel about the country and our future. If on election day, the result seems to be inexplicable, that is a failure of journalism. Close quote. Wow. Truer words have they ever been written?
Yeah.
Can we give the man a round of applause? Yeah. So why don't journalists do more of this? First, it's hard. Hard to get those people to talk. It's time consuming, and it's not going to pay off. Like the clickbait that, look at yourselves in the mirror, we all tend to snack on throughout the day because we can't resist the headlines that confirm our received opinions and gin up our outrage. Newsrooms in the digital era are short on revenue. The ad dollars have all gone to Google and Facebook, and short on staff. They don't have the time or the financial wherewithal to conduct altruistic experiments that might inspire people to do things differently. Wait, here I am at the Missouri School of Journalism, where on any given day, I have more students than I can reasonably grade in time for their next deadline. They are eager for clips. And since they're not here, I can say this, bad for them, good for me, they are unpaid. Moreover, we are sitting on what I like to call the San Andreas fault line of political polarization. Columbia is a blue dot on the Great Red Plains, but our area isn't exactly deep blue. In 2020, all but 4 counties in Missouri were what political analysts would call landslide counties. That's a county where one presidential candidate or another wins by more than 20% of the vote. Boone was one of 4 outliers. Now, this for me as a journalist, for Democrats, it's a problem, but for me as a journalist, this raises an intriguing possibility. What if we could coax our neighbors out of their red corners and their blue corners into the white space in the middle and have a conversation? This was the idea behind the other inspiration for this project, a little experiment that we conducted last year in partnership with our colleagues at the other Columbia, the Columbia School of Journalism in New York City. Our two journalism schools were approached by an organization with some funding for an experiment. The idea, it was called News Ambassador, and the idea was to get schools with radio programs to send reporters out to two communities that on paper were very different, to see if, as one of the organizers put it, we really are as divided as we think we are. Columbia and New York City chose Flatbush, Brooklyn. Brooklyn County voted 77% for Biden 4 years ago. Flatbush boasts more than 53,000 people per square mile. The median age is 39. The median household income is $71,000. The population is 35% white. The Missouri School of Journalism chose Moberly in Randolph County, where 75% of the people backed Trump 4 years ago.
Only
Moberly,
75?
Moberly, well, I call into the Secretary of State to double check that. Moberly has about 1,000 people per square mile compared to 53,000 for Flatbush. The median age is 38, about the same. The median household income is just shy of $40,000. The population, 82% white. So that makes for a pretty good study in contrast, no? The project asked us to organize a town hall meeting where we'd gather the residents' views. This was another big reason we picked Moberly. I don't know if you know him, but the outgoing president of the Moberly Area Community College, Jeff Lashley, is a really nice guy. Yeah. And I knew he would give us a room on his lovely campus. Our problem was filling. I had students calling and Facebooking and in various ways, pulling out all the stops to sell this event with free food to the community. They were met with icy suspicion. Same when I went with them and pounded the pavement with leaflets and bright smiles. I learned something in that visit. What are you really here for? People kept asking. Finally, I asked why they didn't believe we were there for the reasons we were telling them we were there. The media only comes here, I was told, when there's a disaster or a scandal. Right. Oof.
And they've got the prison.
Yep. But message delivered. Message delivered and truth hurts if you're on the end of it. Interestingly and tellingly, our Columbia University colleagues were reporting a similar response in Flatbush. Eventually, our two teams were able to induce a small, brave band of community residents in each community to join us over sandwiches. The Missouri School of Journalism went first. Just before our meeting, the two teams and the organizers had a conversation about what questions to ask. Ask them about transgender rights, one person said. Ask them about gun control, abortion. The KBIA news director and I politely but adamantly refused. The whole idea of the project, we reminded our colleagues, was to let the community members tell us what they thought was important. So we asked open-ended questions. What do you like most about your community? Why do you live here? What are some challenges you and your neighbors face? What improvements would you like to see? Our Columbia University colleagues, whose Flatbush event followed ours by a couple of days, had to then follow the same script. And they agreed with us. They definitely did. And guess what? left to their own devices, not prompted by the polarization industrial complex, the Biden supporters of Brooklyn County, New York, and the Trump supporters of Randolph County, Missouri, agreed. The most pressing problem facing both communities, affordable housing.
Wow.
Now, how many in-depth, solutions-oriented stories have you seen about that on your favorite cable news outlet or your social media feed? I am proud to say that the Columbia Missourian, with absolutely no prompting from me, actually did an in-depth story on affordable housing in our community recently. But good community journalists care about the communities they live in. The vast polarization industrial complex cares about clicks, cares about audience, and keeping you scrolling, no matter what the cost to your sense of community or to your soul. And as I earlier explained, the Columbia Missourian has assets that many community newsrooms today sadly do not. Bright, eager young journalists who are willing to provide service to our community gratis in exchange for learning their craft. Now, I don't want to overpromise. No one news organization, no one journalism school, and certainly no one old professor can solve the challenges that our civil society faces. But we can launch some experiments that might provide a model for the future. And we can give the young journalists who will shape that future something to aspire to. That is why I and my students are looking for Missourians who are willing to let us spend some time with them over the next 10 months. We don't care so much whom you're voting for. We just want to know what's on your minds and in your hearts as you prepare to vote or not vote. We think the people should be telling the candidates and their consultants what the top issues of campaign 2024 should be, and not the other way around. And we are looking for people who will help us. I brought business cards with me, and I'm happy to share my contact information for your newsletter. I'm already out there on social media, so it doesn't matter if I'm doxxed again. So if you're interested in participating, or if you know someone who would be a good candidate for this project, or if you have an idea, and because you're politically active, I bet you do, about places or events where we might go to recruit participants, please reach out to me. And so now I would really like to take your questions, but also your suggestions and feedback, because the people I've been talking to are really helping to shape this project. And I will be able to take them back to my students where we're workshopping this week. So how about me?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I was wondering, for your project, what demographics are you looking for? Who are you looking for to be participants in this?
A wide range, really diverse. I mean, we're looking for people who are Democrats, Republicans, unaffiliated, libertarian, you name it. We're looking for people who are politically active, who are politically disengaged. That's why I say non-voters. Those will be the hardest people to get. But we're looking for people who are young, old. My students, of course, are very comfortable talking to young people, but we have to get them talking to across generations, and all the usual demographic, racially diverse, but really ideologically diverse. And I think in this part of the state, we have a great opportunity to get ideological diversity that, I talked, some of you were at the League of Women Voters, where I talked about this book called The Big Sort, which is a great book that political junkies are into. And it talks about how in this country, we've tended to, even before the internet, even in real life, we've tended to move ourselves into ideologically like-minded neighborhoods. And but I think Boone County is still a pretty mixed county. And so I think we have a good opportunity to have some kind of dialogue, even if my my reporters are the intermediaries, and the other thing we have is a wide range of mediums that we can use. We have KBIA, we have KOMU, we have Missourian, we have Missouri Business Alert, we have bots. And so depending on the way the conversation goes, I think there are lots of ways we can both feature voters, but also reach out to them too. So,
Scott.
yes.
Hi, Scott.
Yes, we've talked. Yeah, thank you.
As I told you before, I probably have a bunch of diverse people that I could get into.
Yes.
Apologize for being late. Still working.
But you've heard the spiel before.
I've heard the spiel before.
Yeah.
But I did not know if you have an actual date for kicking off, or is this going to be a gradual?
It's going to be gradual. I mean, we've gotten a little bit detoured. I have a couple of students right now working on a story about the lack of a standard primary election and how the Democratic and the Republican caucus and the Democratic write-in ballot is going to work. But I think we're going to start pretty seriously in the next couple of weeks recruiting voters. I'm consulting with a woman who has been a fellow at the Reynolds Journalism Institute, which, as many of you know, is part of the Missouri School of Journalism or attached to it. And she really specializes on building trust in journalism. I'm very conscious of wanting to, I don't want to invite people to be targets of trolls. So, but we're trying to strategize very carefully about how to make that work. And I don't think it's really a super big concern. I think the journalists themselves, we tend to be the targets, but it's a different world than the journalism world that I grew up in, and so we have to adapt to that. Yeah.
And would you be the contact, or would some students be?
Well, I will be the initial contact. So, but once, our students start getting involved, you should talk to them. They're the reporters, but I'm an editor. I'm effectively the editor of the project. So, what I tell anybody is, if you have a beef or a concern or a question or an idea and you can't reach the reporter, call me. And our students, they're students. So the students I'm working with right now are seniors. They all hopefully will graduate in May. But then we'll have another crop of students coming in the fall. And so the reporters change, but the editor doesn't.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
First, I just want to point out, Ruth Millage mentioned in the chat, and you may know this already, that the city has a list of neighborhood associations and their
that's a great idea.
And then those are people that are civically engaged and might be able to be the "this is good people" person between you and them.
Oh, that's a great idea. Thank you, Ruth. Okay. Yeah.
That person's a vouch for you as you found them locally. My question is, so I'm picturing initially there's going to be some sort of an intake form, like how do you describe yourself, your age, your demographics, so you can see what your options are. But then toward the end, is this going to be more of a like, we met with John, not his real name, 15 times over the thing, and this is how John's views? Is it going to be like you could actually kind of get attached to one of the individuals?
We definitely want to get attached to the individuals. How we will,
what I'm saying?
Yes,
different ways to do this.
Yeah, no, there are different ways to do this, and I would say how we do this, I think we're going to shape it as we go, and we will probably do that, and we will do it in conjunction with our sources, which is another different thing about this. So how many of you here, are any of you familiar with the Missouri Photo Workshop?
I'm not. I'd like to be.
Yeah, I think it's still on. I think the exhibit is at the State Historical Society, I believe, till the end of February, but Missouri Photo Workshop is run out of the Missouri School of Journalism, and it grew out of the WPA. You probably all remember seeing the great, photos that the WPA photographers did. They went across the country during the Depression. It was an employment program, but it also produced a fantastic historical record. And after that program wound down, there were photographers at the Missouri School of Journalism who essentially kept it going. And they did so by creating this Missouri Photo Workshop that every fall photographers from all over the world, it's juried, come in, and there's I forget how many, but they come in and they pick one small town in Missouri. Columbia used to be one of them, but now we're too big. And they go to that community for a week and embed themselves with the community and find stories. And they don't know going in what, to answer your question, how is the story going to come out? But then they shaped it over the week. And then the editors who work with these photographers are great, world-renowned photo editors. And then at the end of the week, they have a show, and it's usually in a high school gym. It's in some humble little place in a humble little town. And these world-class photographers stand there with their subjects. Mm-hmm. And I love that because it is not a transactional relationship then between a reporter and a journalist and a source. It is a human relationship, mm-hmm. and where it elevates the humanity. So I really, in both, I think the journalist and the subject. So in some ways, that's a model for me going into this project. That I find the Missouri Photo Workshop incredibly inspiring, and I think it's the kind of journalism we should be doing more of. We can't do that all the time. If two planes fly into the World Trade Center, we don't have time to build a relationship, so that's the reality. But I think this gives us an opportunity in election season to really check in with America. It's like, every year the president does a State of the Union, and says, here's what I think the State of the Union is, and that's great. But why don't we check in with ourselves? And so I don't know yet exactly how we'll do this. We certainly will be interested in reporting on stories, but I could see some people where we just do a full-scale profile on some voters, mm-hmm. just like we would a candidate.
Yeah.
Now, some voters might not be, or I keep saying voters, but Missourians, voting age people who are eligible to vote is who I'm looking for.
Yeah.
But they may not be comfortable with that, so we wouldn't do that if you're not comfortable with that. But mm-hmm. if you are and you're interesting, we think everybody's interesting, yeah. But we might do some in-depth profiles, so meet your neighbor kind of thing. And why is it? I don't really think you have to hold elective office to have a news story written about it. So that's where we're going. Yeah.
The other question I've got is, it sounds very academic, and it's probably where you're coming from. Not that academics.
Not really, I'm a journalist. I'm not an academic.
Well, that's what I'm right. Do you expect to publish the results of your work in a place and in such a way that it might actually have an effect or an impact on the election?
Yeah, that's where the Reynolds Journal. Well, on the election, I don't know, because we're not an electoral college state, right? We're not a swing state.
Yeah.
And I'm more interested in the impact this could have on journalism. And I think,
but on journalists.
Well, here's the way it could have an impact, but I'm a realist, mm-hmm. having been a journalist. If we, in the course of our interviewing people, find that there is an issue or several issues that keep coming up across the demographic and ideological, then we, as a journalism school, and it's not just my students, I can go to my colleagues who are editing and say, hey, this issue keeps coming up again and again, maybe we should do a story about it. And in the course of doing the story, we would certainly contact the candidates, and it might be the presidential candidates, but maybe even some of the other candidates who are running for relevant offices that might have an impact on this, to say, what do you think about this issue? A lot of voters are asking us about this. So it could have an impact that way. But I would assume if you're an intelligent candidate or political consultant, you're going to be reading the paper, watching the news, and if you see something like this, you might say something. And so it could have an impact that way. But I think longer term, I think the impact, my hope is that we will have an impact on our profession. And we would do that in two ways. I think actually a lot of journalists would like to do this, but for the constraints that I mentioned cannot. So I think if we have an opportunity to do a proof of concept, and we will certainly publish our stories in the Columbia Missourian, KVIA, KOME, the appropriate platforms. So you'll be seeing us throughout the campaign, and that's journalism. If you want to call this academic, the Reynolds Journalism Institute has various ways of communicating with the industry. They have a blog, they have a website, they do newsletters, that sort of thing. And so we will be writing for them. And people in the industry read that. And then, but perhaps the most potent weapon I have, the most important vector for change, are the students. Because guess what? Missouri School of Journalism students get jobs. I do not have a single concern about our students getting jobs because they are very well prepared and they are sought after. And they will very quickly rise up the ranks in newsrooms around not just this country, but the world. And if they have had a good experience that makes them feel like they're doing journalism that's revelatory and has an impact, that's going to carry through. So I'm playing the long game here. Right.
Alice, did you have your hand up or were you just stretching?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I greatly appreciate it. By the way, Cliff Edom was something special.
Yes, he was. Yeah, I didn't know him, but boy, I've seen his legacy and it's amazing. Yeah.
My question is,
One of the
looking
founders of the
large,
Missouri Photo Workshop.
you
Yeah.
have the purpose to address the obvious limitation of contemporary news availability, which is that the obvious outlets to get non-sensational local news into the consciousness of those way is if you have a local press, and the local press is disappearing. And even the Missourian has had declining readership, and the Tribune has tanked. What do we do to get this? And not many places have a KVIA or a KOPN.
We're very lucky.
If we want to go further, it has to be more than roving teams out of Columbia, Northwestern, and Missouri going out there and hitting the occasional town. We have to have journalists putting stuff. Where do they put it?
Well,
they can't get it into local newspapers. From there, it'll be looked at by the Dave Richardson Daily or somebody, and some of it picked up.
Yeah, well, the problem, I mean, first of all, I think there's solutions out there. And that's one of the reasons I came to the Missouri School of Journalism, because I think we're a laboratory. And journalism schools, I mean, that's what we care about, is figuring out how do we make local news pay again, right? And so there's a couple of hopeful signs. One, you're right that it can't be just a handful of journalism schools, but the handful of journalism schools that are doing this. And by the way, like the Missouri School of Journalism, I was not a graduate, so I can be relatively objective. I mean, it really pioneered this model. But so people from Missouri should be incredibly proud of that. But it is a model that is increasingly being adopted across the country because of exactly the loss that you're talking about of local news outlets. And that is due to, a lot of financial factors that are worth a PhD thesis. And I can go into some of them, but what is happening is increasingly, I think you're seeing an awareness, and interestingly, a bipartisan awareness of the danger that represents. So what we see is that more and more, it's not that there's a lack of information out there. So there's more information than ever, and it's delivered to you nonstop. The problem is that there are fewer reporters, right? And so you're getting a lot of information, but a lot of it is, to use the technical academic newsroom term, crap. And so what do we do? And why is that? That's because anyone who has a smartphone is a publisher now. And that's good in some ways because it's elevated voices that when I first started in journalism, it was an unusual thing to be a woman, much less a person of color or somebody who had a view that was, an identity that was considered outre, then like, oh, wow, you're gay. That's different. And so, so it's good that there's been this leveling of the field, but the problem is that if everybody's a publisher, everybody really needs to be trained in journalism, I think. You need to know how to be a reporter, how to check sources, how to verify things. And if you're going to be getting information online, you really need to do that, because there is a big difference between information you get online and information you get over the legacy airwaves or on paper. And the difference is this. If I write something about you that's false in the Columbia Missourian and defamatory, you can sue not only me, good luck with that, because I'm a journalist, that's not going to get you a whole lot of money, but you can sue the Columbia Missourian. You can put the same info on Facebook, and the only person you can sue is me.
Section 230.
Exactly. Which, by the way, was, I think at the time it was done, it was very well-meaning. It was a bipartisan measure. Ron Wyden from Oregon and Chris Cox from California, they were left coasters. So they were very aware of this nascent industry that in their neck of the woods. And, in 1996, when Section 230 was enacted into law, which if you don't know what that is, it's a provision of the Telecommunications Act that basically immunizes internet service providers from libel.
They're
And
just a carrier.
Yeah,
They
they're
have
just,
no
they're more like the postman,
Yeah.
right? Like
Right.
you're not going to hold the postman responsible for the
messenger.
poison pen letter, right?
The
And
messenger.
so there's lots of reasons to think that's not the case anymore. But at the time, at the time, in 1996, I mean, Facebook didn't exist. It was about like 6 or 8 years away from being born. It was Google was literally a garage band. And so, I think it was very well intended, but times have changed.
Yeah.
And so to your question is, what do we do about that? Well, we need to figure out what a trusted news source is. And it might be an online news source in your community, but it needs to be a news source that has some standards and ethics and people who have some training. And we're thinking about ways we can re-inject that into the communities. The good news is there's a consortium of now about 25 foundations that is rolling out an initiative called Press Forward. And they have together committed, now it's almost $600 million to rebuilding local news. It's not going to necessarily be a printed newspaper. It might be a website. It might be a Facebook site, but it's going to be ways that you can communicate with people and get news out there. And interestingly, there's a member of Congress named Claudia Tenney who was a newspaper publisher before she came to Congress. And she has a bill that would provide help for news organizations. And I've noticed, I have a congress.gov alert on that bill, and they've been gaining sponsors, and they are sponsors, both Democrat and Republican, and some of the Republicans are pretty conservative, people who you would think the press is evil and terrible, but they're signing on to this bill. So I view that as a hopeful sign. I think people are becoming more aware of exactly what you said and the dangers there. So, but the question is, I feel like we're in a race, and can we get to the finish line before, somebody burns the house down? So, yeah. Yes.
I just.
Oh, yeah, you're
sorry,
the
I'm
moderator. I'm sorry.
Alice-
Yes, I'm in my professor mode.
Yes, yeah,
Sorry.
no,
I'm going to turn that over to you. Yes.
It's not a huge
Yeah, right.
question, but so you talked about wanting to reach diverse voters. So does that mean you want to work with individuals and kind of interview them and find out where they're at? Because like on Meet the Press last night, they had a forum of women
Mhm.
that were
Focus group.
Yeah.
a focus group kind of thing. And, but then you're often influenced by the people around you when you're in a group like that. I've done focus groups, and I was.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll do both.
Right.
But the community meetings are the ways into those individual interviews.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so we will do both, but our, kind of the holy grail here is really finding some people who are willing, and it's a commitment, but it's not, we're not going to be super bothersome, but who agree to let us come back and talk to them
Here's an
on
unusual
multiple
group.
occasions.
My
Yeah.
field is public health.
Mhm.
It's a statewide network of school health nurses.
Okay.
They really know their small communities, and that plus the local health department really represents health
Okay.
in those
Okay. That's a
communities,
great suggestion.
and they know the divergent people in their schools.
Okay.
So yeah.
I love that idea. Okay.
Sue had a question, and do you have,
Actually, had a statement more.
okay, and I'll need to repeat it for the people at home,
Okay.
because I had a text, they're having trouble hearing anybody beyond about her.
I'll just,
If you want to, yeah, if you don't mind, just come yell at this white thing. Give us a second. Yeah.
I was talking to my, newspaper delivery person just this week. I asked him how many papers he's delivering. I'd asked him before, maybe a year ago, I don't remember, it may have been 2 years ago, he said around 700. He's now doing 500, and it's almost all older folks. But the interesting thing is that he had a service, he and his wife, and I said, what was the high? He said, we had 40,000, 7 papers he still delivers.
Mhm.
And this is in the western part of Columbia. And they had 6 drivers. Now I don't, in addition to his wife, he and his wife having separate things. I don't know if they,
Wow.
I don't know if the 6 drivers were part-time. He and his wife were full-time.
Mhm.
But anyway, I just thought people hear and would like to hear. I mean, that's what's happened.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things that have happened. One, first of all, my students don't look at paper. They just don't,
Yeah.
And so, the Columbia Missourian, which is the paper I know best, has a very robust web presence, and we have a lot of readers there too. So there will be a move, paper. I think there's still, my own belief is there is a place for paper, but it will be more long form and special kind of publications, and what are now inserts in the paper, commemorative editions, that kind of thing. So eventually paper will go away. Not right away though, because
My generation.
well, that's right, and mine. I mean, I like paper, and but my students like paper too. It's just not their go-to. Right. And it's expensive. It is not environmentally friendly on neither of these machines. But paper is very costly. The ink is an environmental hazard. And so there's all kinds of reasons for publishers to move away from it. And they would like to move away faster, but our advertising in print is still a much more lucrative proposition than online advertising. The other thing that's happened is it's really hard to get people to deliver the paper. It's very, very hard to get people to deliver the paper. And so even news I know people who work for newspapers they would love to deliver more papers. They have people who want the paper delivered, but they are going to, they're just having trouble finding drivers. And then the last thing is, and this is kind of scary, the federal government wants to raise postal rates. They always do. But there's a special rate for newspapers because a lot of newspapers, especially in rural areas, are mailed. And there's always been a special rate for newspapers. And because And this gets to another point. I want to get back to your question about what do we do? And I talked about Claudia Tenney's bill. Our government, you taxpayers, have always supported the media in this country. We always think, and my colleagues say, oh, we never could take a government subsidy. Well, guess what? You already are. Because the postal rate that was cut, and it was done because back in the day, our Congress thought, well, it's important to have information in a democracy, so we're going to make it cheaper and easier for people to get information, so we're going to give the newspapers a special break. Well, they want to raise it a lot. I forget and it would be devastating to rural newspapers. So, write your member of Congress. That would be a terrible thing. And, everybody has to pay a little bit more in these inflationary times, but this would be and the Missouri Press Association has all the facts and figures, but it's really scary, especially in states like ours where there are rural papers. But anyway, yes, I'm sorry.
Just another question though, regarding your project. I'm wondering, what will you do to ensure that your participation audience, the people who you're interviewing, reflect the population as a whole? For example, if voter turnout is around, pick a number, 35%, what will you people do to ferret out the other 65%? How are you going to focus on those and break down the statistics and demographics?
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh,
So that was David Mallory, and he's asking, how will Professor Kiely's project make sure that the people they're speaking to reflect the demographics of the communities they're pulling from, so that like a small subset that's maybe more active isn't overrepresented?
Right.
Fair? Okay.
yeah, that's basically our interviewing. We're going to interview people. We'll track it. Reporters keep source sheets. We keep notes of like this person leans right or leans left or whatever. But so that we do. I've done that for years as a reporter, and so we will do our best to calibrate it so that it's not all one side, not on the other side. But it's not going to be a scientific poll. It's going to be more of a impressionistic snapshot of the community, because we're not scientific pollsters.
The more people who are more apt to speak to you are those who are already.
Well, no, that's exactly right. And that's why, and I've said that to my students. I said that, the low hanging fruit, it's easy to get people who are already engaged. The people who aren't engaged, that'll be the hardest part for us. And that's why I say, like, if you know of hangouts in your community or street fairs that are coming, or any kind of an activity where there are going to be people out who are there for a whole host of reasons, and we could just sort of go out. And I've warned my students. Yeah, I said 8 out of 10 people will say I'm not interested. Mm-hmm. Quit bothering me. And that's hard for young people to hear, but they have to develop a thick skin. And
when you're young and cute, they're a little more likely to
well,
not say
that's true. And that's why,
right.
Yeah.
Like why that's why lemonade stands so
right.
well.
Better. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Speak nice and loud.
You you were a reporter in Washington, D.C. You said for how many years?
Oh, you're not allowed to ask. No, almost 40 years. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Well, we are both natives.
Yeah. Okay.
And I wanted to ask you, as a Washington reporter, you were working for what kinds of outlets?
Well, what people like to deride as the mainstream media. I worked
Washington Post.
Well, no, I didn't work for the Washington Post. I started as a regional correspondent. So I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I was a Washington correspondent for the Pittsburgh Press. Mm-hmm. And then I had a similar job and then became the bureau chief for the Houston Post. And I worked for the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, and I worked for the New York Daily News. So I moved around a lot. USA Today is one you would know. So I moved into national politics, and then I became, I worked for an organization called the National Journal, which, and that year that was the 2012 election, and we had a team. We worked with CBS News. So I almost gave my colleagues a heart attack once when one of the young CBS production assistants was helping me one night, and I said, "Well, Walt, you really took great notes on that. Do you want a byline?" And he said, "Oh, I would love a byline." He was just out of college, and so we worked on that. And I said, "Well, how do you want your byline to read?" And so the next day, when the byline Walter Cronkite appeared, but it was his grandson, and it was really cute. My boss almost died. He just said, "What?"
The key question, which I was leading up to, is: in the day, how much time did you spend in Anacostia?
Not very much, because, when I lived in DC, Anacostia is now a very up and coming neighborhood, but it was not at the time. Yeah, it was not at the time. No.
And aren't we dealing with a cultural problem among journalists too?
Well, yes, but it's not just where you live in DC. It's the fact that I forget what the figure is, but it's more than 50% of journalists live in 5 cities.
Yes.
And so, Boston, New York, Washington, Chicago, it's a problem. And that's why this whole project to try to revive local news is really, really important. But I'll say this in defense of the journalists. There aren't many good jobs in between those cities that can support a family. And so I have no worries about my students getting jobs. What I'm more worried about is what happens 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when they have the seasoning to be really good journalists and they have institutional memory that's important for their communities, and they need enough money for a mortgage, or they need enough money, they want to have kids. And then are they going to be willing to stay? It's a much tougher proposition now than it was when I was that age. So I think that is not just a journalism problem. That is a civil society problem that we really need to think about.
Yeah. And when you talk about local journalism, it seems to me that most of the papers are not doing local. And so that if you have a weekly, that's the most likely to be a community newspaper.
Yes, the question was what the papers even don't seem to be doing a lot of journalism now, and the weeklies are the ones that seem to do the most local journalism. And that is true. And that is because, we always called the newspaper the Daily Miracle, those of us who worked in it. And think about back in the day, like how many pages we had to fill. But even today, even if you have an 8-page paper, that's a lot to fill, especially if you're down to 2 reporters, right? And so what you're seeing in your local paper is a lot of wire copy, which is great stuff, the Associated Press writing out of Timbuktu or whatever in Washington, and that's all great stuff, but you're not getting as much local news because there aren't the legs there anymore. And that is what the Press Forward campaign is all about, is trying to get, and one of the things we're trying to do is get more community foundations to participate at a local level, because there are a lot of philanthropic organizations that have never funded journalism. But what the Knight Foundation, which funds my chair, says, and I think it's a pretty good line, whatever your cause is, the second cause should be journalism. Because if you care about the environment, you need to have that. You need to have journalism about the environment. If you care about democracy, you need to have journalism about democracy. Of course, journalism and democracy go hand in hand. If you care about health, you need to have that written about, covered on TV, covered in the radio. So I think we need to be more aware of just how embedded journalism is in the democratic process. And so, and think about that as citizens, and what are we willing to pay for? Your quarters, and even now your dollars, don't begin to cover the cost of the Daily Miracle. It's advertising has always done it, but because of the way the digital environment has changed, and because it is now possible for you, the consumer, to be micro-targeted. And by the way, when you go onto those websites, it's not free. You're paying with your data. And that same data is being used to target not only advertisements at you, but information in your news feed. So try doing a Google search with a Republican friend and see the different results you get. And so if you have a friend or a relative, this is the whole Thanksgiving problem, right? You have a relative who has a different mindset from you, and you used to be able to just kid each other and kid around at the Thanksgiving table, and now it becomes a massive blow up, and you wreck the dinner, and that's because of this filter bubble problem, because we're paying with our data, and that data makes us targets. And so all we're seeing is stuff we already agree with. And then it's like, I mean, I'm sure there are people, I don't have to go very far in our own neck of the woods, who sincerely believe that Joe Biden didn't win the election because they don't know a single person who voted for him.
Majority.
And because we're being herded we've herded ourselves as the big sort and outlines, but also we're being herded by algorithms that are trying to make money by keeping you on the site. So what possible incentive does Facebook or Google or whatever website you're using have to give you a story you're uncomfortable with? That's the problem.
When I saw that you were unmuted a second ago, Wynn Caldwell. So if you want to ask a question, let's let you go next. David Mallory had a question, and then if we'll come back to you if you've got one you'd like to ask. If you're at home on Zoom, you can unmute yourself long enough to ask a question, and if we're quiet in the room, you'll come out through the projector and we can hear the question. But let David go first, and then we'll circle back and see if she had a question.
Now I'm thinking the people, a lot of medical research is done through NU. They offer compensation of some sort to their test subjects.
Right.
And I'm thinking the people that you would want to talk to are the ones who would only do it if you're going to compensate them. Now, those who say, "Oh, yeah, you can have my opinion," they're the ones you don't want to hear from.
We did that.
So just something to throw out.
Yeah, no, it's a thought, but traditionally we don't pay for news because that gets into the
No,
whole
we're not
national.
news, you're research.
Yeah,
Though. You're not
yeah.
a news person now. You do it from a research point of view.
Yeah, no, but we're doing this for journalism, so ethics would prohibit that. I think it's a nice
The
idea.
medical field.
We even went into this, that the experiment I told you about. It's different, and because there is a terrible, the whole pay for news. Then what are you really getting reliable?
This is news though. You're doing research now. Research.
But through the journalism.
Yeah.
And you have
Yeah.
to go.
Only if they're publishing it, then it becomes news. But
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, but I don't think we'd go there. Yeah,
I
yeah,
think feeding them is one
yeah.
similar.
Back to your project, seems like what you're really wanting to find out is what people think are important,
Mhm.
and you're aware of the difficulty of getting that information. Have you ever read Studs Terkel? I thought he was pretty good at it in that, he had a reputation of being a socialist, but he just wanted to talk to people about their work and working. And somehow that approach, I thought was really effective. I mean,
Yeah, that's
he
a good idea.
continues to have your students probably never heard of him.
Yeah. Well, some have.
And he was a sociologist. You're
Yes.
talking about sociology here.
Yeah. Well, journalism is a form of sociology. Yeah.
Studs Terkel came to a weekend event. David Phelan in the history department brought him. That was probably in the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
No, that's interesting. I might actually, that's a good idea. I might go pull out a couple of Terkel interviews and show them to the students. That's a really good idea. Yeah.
It's very hard to get people to tell you what they really think or what's important.
No, this is one of the things we talked about in our class. I said, because oftentimes, this is what I found as a journalist, people will give you what they think are their reasons for voting. But if you really do an in-depth interview, you realize there are some other factors there that sometimes when people have problems that are so profound, they don't even want to admit it to themselves because it feels so out of control. But those are the problems that politicians and leaders need to know about.
And I think psychoanalysis would be good.
That might be a bridge too far for me, but
Like the medical insurance, I bet that'll come up as far as.
It might,
something
yeah.
of their concerns.
Yeah.
Since that's the big thing for, when you have, what do we call it? Bankruptcy. That's the other reason
Yes.
for bankruptcy.
Yeah. It's scary. Yeah.
Are you struck by the irony that in the last quarter century has relatively easy access to professionally moderated information about smaller communities in Missouri have become less widely available? At the same time, that professionally moderated news about the world has become much more accessible. We take the Washington Post, the New York Times, Economist, and so forth online, as well as access to Al Jazeera and Le Monde and whatever, with great ease. I don't have to go to the journalism library anymore.
Do you know this app called Radio Garden? It's so cool. You can listen to radio stations all over the world.
Oh, I
It's
bet.
really cool. It's amazing. And if something's happening in a hotspot, you can go right to that radio station. It's
Isn't that
very
ironic?
cool. Yeah. Well, it is. That is why, yeah, it's very difficult because it gets back to the thing we talked about, trying to make local journalism so that you can make a living at it. And that's why you're seeing that. I mean, we all lived in Washington. I don't know about you, but when I wanted to vote and I vote in every election, if it's just dog catcher or whatever, because I have been to too many countries where people die because they can't do that. And so I vote in every election. And in DC, when I would want to vote for city council or whatever, I would have to make it a major research project,
Yeah.
to figure out like who's any good.
Yeah.
Because and I was in a city and I daily had delivered to my door one of the finest newspapers in the world, but they weren't covering their local community.
Right.
And they're not doing it. And Jeff Bezos has made a decision. They're not doing. I mean, they do. But with this last round of layoffs, the biggest hit was in the metro department.
Yeah.
And why is that? Because it doesn't make money. It does not make money. And so, but the question is, are you going to be able to keep it as a loss leader? Back in the day when I was a reporter, a young reporter, we used to cover state legislative races. I mean, I wrote about a state legislative race as if it were somebody running for the president of the United States, and boy, voters had a lot of information on it. We would put the celebrity divorce story on the front page of the paper, usually below the fold, but we knew because we knew people would go. It was catnip, gossip. We also covered the state legislative subcommittee hearing on the secondary education budget. Wasn't on the front page, but it was in the paper. Okay, in the digital era, and we kind of knew, not many people would read that, but it should be in the paper. And the celebrity divorce story would get a lot of eyeballs. Now we have data. Every newsroom has a big screen like that called Chartbeat. And at any given moment of the day, I can look up at that screen and I know exactly how many people are reading the celebrity divorce story and how many people are reading the state legislative subcommittee hearing story on the secondary education budget. And guess what? If you're an editor or a publisher and you don't have a whole lot of money and you're trying to make a decision about how many reporters you're going to keep on each of those stories, so that's the problem. And the problem is big news organizations are not in the financial position they used to be to carry loss leaders. So how do we put them back in that position? It's a hard problem.
I am really thankful for the Missouri Independent.
They do a great job.
Yeah,
And that is a nonprofit news is going to be a big part of this ecosystem. And I will say what you get here from the Missouri School of Journalism, that has been a nonprofit news leader since 1908.
Right.
And our state legislature is covered like a blanket by students from the University of Missouri.
Right.
So, I mean, we have something special here.
Yeah.
Just in support of what you were just saying, we will often get in the newspaper the weekend before election day, big synopsis. And lots of people, my wife and I are poll workers, and we're supposed to absentee vote ahead of time. So we're all told,
And it's
well,
too
we
late.
absentee voted the week before, and then stuff comes out of that paper. We're like, oh, we wish we voted for this other person.
The
Oh,
voter
that's
profile
interesting.
is
Okay,
too
but
late.
I'll tell them
Voter
that.
profile
That's a
is too
good
late
suggestion
sometimes.
because increasingly people are voting early.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Okay, thank you for
we
that
do have a
suggestion.
function.
Okay. Okay.
We should probably, it's a little after 1, so we probably would wrap this up.
Any last comments?
I will, if you want to put in the chat my email address, and then I'll give you all the people who are here, my business card, but it's Kiely, Kylie, Kielyk at Missouri.edu.
That's good enough.
And my office, I can't read that from here, but
Okay,
anyway, I'll just
here's my
trust it.
email and
And my office number is 573-882-4879.
This has been excellent.
thank you so
Well,
much.
thank you for, and you come up with some really excellent suggestions, so thank you to you. I really appreciate it.
And
Okay.
it's been recorded if you want to share it with maybe your,
Okay,
you know,
awesome.
be on our
Thank you.
website.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
Give us 2 or 4 hours. to get
Yeah,
the
all right,
file
that's super.
crunched.
Thank you.
Great, I'm gonna grab my business card.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
do it.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah.
you for fighting the good fight.
Yeah.
And next time, try to come up with a hard project.
Yeah,
I know, it's,
Because
Really,
then
thank
when
you.
you were talking about the photo thing, they also did come out and support me.
Yeah, I would.
oh, yes, I do. They have a wonderful book.
And then you email you later a few more things that occurred to me earlier today.
Yeah, I've got some ideas. So I'm a little confused. She's not focusing on another project. She's focusing.
I think the Moakley thing is done. She's gonna do